Okay, so it's 3 minutes past 10 here in The Hague, in the Netherlands. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone on this webinar on improving smallholder farmers and NGOs access to Genebank materials. My name is Nout van der Vaart. I'm a policy lead food and land working with Oxfam Novib in the Netherlands. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Okay, so I will give a short introduction about the trajectory of this webinar and the objectives of this webinar and the series of webinars that we envision to organize. Let me first start by saying that this webinar has been an initiative of the CGIAR Genebank initiative, the Center for Technology and Development Trust from Zimbabwe, as well as Oxfam Novib, as these three organizations, found each other in a joint and a mutual need and understanding that there is a need to improve collaborations and interactions between farmer organizations and civil society organizations on the one hand side, and CGIAR institutes on the other hand. As in an increasing in a context of increasing challenging climatic circumstances, there is, as we all know, an urgent need for the uptake in the field of more and different plant varieties, plant genetic resources that are more resilient to a changing climate. Smallholder farmers play a critical role in food production, and as main stakeholders in food production and in the preservation of plant genetic resources, it is much needed that their access to genetic materials gets improved. The topic that we'll be discussing today, improved access to Genebank materials by smallholder farmers and civil society organizations, ties into a broader conversation that I just touched upon about improving and smoothing collaborations, interactions between farmers on the ground, farmer organizations, and agricultural research centers. With this webinar and with potentially subsequent webinars that we envision to be organizing in the future, we will try to make an inventory of the existing practices and the existing experiences of farmer organizations in their interactions that they are already having with the agricultural research centers and the CG centers. And we would like to also, with this webinar and the series, also to explore further ways on how to improve collaborations, how to reach better outcomes, how to increase the impact of research with farmers on the ground. And I would like to proceed with introducing a couple of people to this call and inviting them to provide some words on the background rationale from the three initiating institutions that have co-organized this webinar. I would like to invite them to provide some words on why they thought this was necessary and how this came about. We will be hearing from Michael Hillwood, Bram de Jonge, and Andrew Mishita. And first, I would like to invite Michael Hillwood from the CGIAR Genebank initiative to take the floor. Michael, the floor is yours, and I'm going to click on the first slide that you'll be using.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening to those of you quite far east. My name is Michael Hillwood. I work for the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT. That's an amalgamation of two of the CGIAR centers, There are 15 international agricultural research centers, which are part of the CGIAR. Most of the work I do is under the framework of the CGIAR Genebank initiative. And the Genebank initiative provides support and creates a space for the CGIAR gene banks to work together on our activities in conservation, working on tools, improving tools, methods, performance, etc. Among other things, we also coordinate CGIAR engagement at the level of the governing body of the plant treaty. And as part of that, every 2 years when the governing body meets, there's time set aside for country delegations, but also for stakeholder groups to get together and meet and compare notes. And it was at such a meeting between civil society organizations, farmers organizations, and the CGIAR, a year ago, that we decided that there were enough issues that we wanted to keep talking about after that meeting, that we set up this sort of very informal mechanism for continued meetings. And then we decided that we should have this webinar and possibly others. So in the course of our discussions at the governing body meeting, we didn't just talk about access to seed. We talked about policies affecting farmer-led seed systems. We talked about farmer and NGO engagement one way or the other in breeding programs run by national programs or even international organizations like CGIAR. Talked about farmers' rights more generally. And as I said, we agreed to follow up through a number of different modalities. And this is sort of a first test, this webinar focusing on farmer access to seed and gene banks. For us, the CGIAR, we distribute approximately from the gene banks across the gene banks about 50,000 samples per year to recipients outside CGIAR, and more or less the same inside, but what we're focusing on now is outside. And about 8% of that 50,000 samples a year goes to NGOs and farmers organizations or farmers. So it's not a huge number, and but it's a significant number, and of course it varies wildly from year to year. So on your screen right now, you can see we put together statistics for the centers for their distributions to farmers and NGOs in 2022, and in 2023, for example, Erie distributed 5,000 additional samples of accessions to a farmers group in the Philippines. So that's not captured here. Every year is a slightly different situation, but you can get a sense of the crops, the centers, the countries that are included. Can you have the next slide, please? And very rarely is it the case that these distributions, particularly to farmers organizations, are a result of sort of a cold call from a farmers organization through an email to the centers. Usually there's an ongoing relationship. It's part of a project where there's something, focusing on restoration of materials back to particular communities in a particular part of the world, or identifying materials in the gene banks that might perform well under local circumstances. I'm still looking at the same slide. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah. And so there's always, generally speaking, particularly where the numbers are larger and to farmers organizations, there's a larger context of these projects. So, SIP, you'll have seen that there are a lot of materials distributed to farmers and NGOs from SIP, and that's in the context of this ongoing repatriation work they're doing with farmers in the Paco de la Papa, but also other farmer organizations. There were pretty impressive numbers on pearl millet and sorghum. Those are being distributed by ICRISAT as part of a GIZ-funded project for strengthening resilience, climate resilience of vulnerable households in Niger and Chad. And again, ICARD is working on this participatory testing of faba bean, and that material is being sent to an association in Italy that just so happens to have a breeder that used to work with ICARD, Salvatore Ceccarelli, who does a lot of work with land races and farmers organizations. So there's usually this larger context, and there isn't time right now to share information about all of those. And it actually occurs to me, because all the centers gave us feedback on these contexts, that it would probably be useful in the follow-up to this to try to put together a document that includes some of those details. It makes for interesting reading and thinking. So yeah, we're very interested in knowing, getting perspectives from farmers and NGOs on limitations or challenges they see getting materials from us. We'd be interested in seeing if they'd be interested in the future in getting more material directly. You know, because of where we sit as international gene banks, there's a tendency for us to be making materials available to national gene banks or national crop improvement programs or national agricultural research organizations, and then they make it available to NGOs or civil society. So or farmers. And so it's interesting to go directly to NGOs and farmers for us. And part of this webinar for us is an exploration as to what's working and what isn't, and how do farmers and civil society organizations think we could do a better job in bridging this gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this introduction. As a next person in line, I would like to invite Bram de Jonge to provide us with a short introduction from Oxfam Novib. Bram, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nout. Yeah, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're from. Very happy to see you joining this webinar. So my name is Bram de Jonge. I'm the Seed Policy Advisor at Oxfam Novib, based in the Netherlands. And part of the program Sowing Diversity equals Harvesting Security, SDHS, which coordinates a seeds program in several countries around the world. Well, a main aim, or the main objective of our program, is to support smaller farmers in managing and their genetic resources, their plant genetic resources, and to improve their resilience against all kinds of shocks. And collaborations with others is key for that. So we try to invest and support farmer field schools on participatory variety selection, variety enhancement, and participatory plant breeding. And our collaborations with the national gene banks, with national research organizations, international research organizations, and gene banks is really essential. And so far, our experience is that these collaborations really depend on individuals. Individuals within these institutions that have a keen interest in collaborating with farmers and spending and investing time in that, in building relations, going to farmer fields, listening to farmer interests. And we would really like to see these relations to be improved. And we hope that by starting this webinar series, and we really have to think of also different modalities to also get more farmers in the loop, as we have seen with the first poll that we saw the results of. We hope that we can start discussions with a bigger group of organizations and stakeholders on this topic, and eventually look at and explore ideas for potential frameworks or institutionalizations of improving these collaborations, something that can support the stronger, closer collaborations between farmers, farm organizations, civil society organizations, and CG on the other hand, together with the national research organizations. So yeah, we would very much like to start exploring that and see how we could hopefully realize that in the future. So thank you so much. Looking forward for your inputs, and I would like to give the floor back to Nout. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bram. So in your screen, you're already seeing the agenda of this the further agenda of this webinar. And since Andrew Mushida is also our first speaker in line, I would like to invite Andrew directly to take the floor and to both introduce himself like Michael and Bram did, and to provide some elaboration on why, from a CTDT perspective, participation and initiation of this webinar was of relevance. But since, Andrew, you're also the first speaker of today, I would like to provide you the floor. Andrew is a director of the Community Technology and Development Trust, and I will invite you now directly to share your screen. I will be stopping to share my screen, Andrew, and I would like to invite you to share your screen so you can have your presentation. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Not. Yeah, I think
Perfect.
I
We
would
can
like
see your
to...
screen. We cannot hear you yet.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Fine. I can hear you fine.
Yes.
We can hear you, yes.
Okay. Yeah, so my name is Andrew Mushita, and I'm the Director of Community Technology Development Trust in Zimbabwe. And yeah, I think as an introductory to this initiative, I think we are jointly organizing this webinar together with Biodiversity International and Oxfam Novib. And really the idea is to enhance cooperation and collaboration to facilitate farmers' access to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, particularly from the CGIAR institutions whom we work with. And as an organization, we do work with a number of stakeholders, governments included, extension, research institutions, and the CGIAR. But this initiative is born out of this poor mechanism or framework where smallholder farmers have no systematic way of accessing some of these plant genetic resources material for food and agriculture. So I think it is very important that we explore these opportunities where farmers would also access these materials and undertake on-farm characterization of the plant genetic resources material. And this will also support farmer seed systems to enhance food and nutrition security. Also, smallholder farmers would be able to participate in crop improvement in their localities with participatory plant breeding and participatory variety selection tools and restoration of lost materials which are needed by farmers. And I think, as has been said, this is important for resilience building in the face of climate change. And also, we need this cooperation and collaboration with community seed banks, where some of the farmers are actually maintaining some of these materials. So, in this context, I think we need to have maybe a clearer framework or a systematic kind of platform which provides or supports farmers' access to plant genetic resources in their requirements. Having said that, let me quickly then go to my presentation. And as a way of introduction, I think accessing genetic resources material from national and international gene banks, our experience as CTDO, and breeding institutions is key to increasing crop diversity in farmers' hands. And crop diversification contributes significantly to food security and nutrition, especially under smallholder farming conditions. And CTD has been facilitating access to these materials from the CG centers such as CIMIT, CIAT, and ICRISAT, and from National Crop Breeding Institute and National Gene Bank of Zimbabwe. And accessing plant genetic resources for food and agriculture from gene banks and the CG centers has increased the smallholder farmers' resilience to climate change-induced droughts and floods in Zimbabwe. So there is really a positive if farmers access these materials. And from the Zimbabwean context, there are legal frameworks in Zimbabwe that support the establishment of gene banks through the following sections. I think section 18.4 of the Constitution affirms that the state must ensure local communities that they access or to access these resources in their areas. And Section 15, subsection C of the Constitution obliges the state to encourage and promote food and nutrition security also. And Section 33 of the Constitution mandates the state to take measures to preserve and protect farmers' knowledge systems, including knowledge of medicinal and other properties of animal and crops possessed by local communities and people. And Section 34 highlights that the state must ensure that all international conventions and treaties and agreements which Zimbabwe is a party to be incorporated into the domestic law. So we have the legal provisions which actually support this. And also, I think Zimbabwe, the status of domesticating some of these international instruments which governs access to plant genetic resources. They have domesticated the Convention on Biodiversity and also the International Treaty and the Nagoya Protocol. And our experience is to access these plant genetic resources material. I think CTDT facilitated farmers access to these materials after signing SMTAs or standard transfer materials with a number of the CG systems. And you can see there that we signed some of these agreements with ICRISAT and also with CIMIT. And in 2017, we signed the SMTA with ICRISAT. And our experience is in Zimbabwe, CTDO work closely with the National Genebank, the National Agriculture Research Center, and we also hold seed and food fairs, which are also we hold in several communities every year. And during these seed fairs, materials are collected and deposited in community seed banks, and duplicate samples are deposited in the National Gene Bank. And the second level of duplication also takes place at the SADC Gene Bank, located in Lusaka, Zambia. If you look at the cumulative number of lines availed from ICRISAT, CIMIT and ICRISAT, 2014 to 2019, you can see that we did access about 40 kind of accessions from ICRISAT, of perimeters from ICRISAT. Sorghum, close to 10, and maize also from CIMIT. So using this SMTA signed between CTDT and ICRISAT and CIMIT. And if we come to ICRISAT, I think we have really accessed quite a significant amount of materials. And you can see the sorghum also, pearl millet, groundnut, cowpeas, maize, chickpea, and pigeon pea. So we've been able to access some of these materials from the CGIAR system. And CTDO also has been worked closely with these institutions to develop some of these materials. And we are quite happy that this has also resulted with the getting access to some of these advanced and segregating populations available to farmers, and farmers have also done this evaluation through participatory plant breeding and variety selection. And a total of about 118 stable lines have been accessed by CTDT, targeting some of these districts from 2015 to 2016. And we have actually been able to get some of these materials during these agriculture seasons. And these materials include sorghum, pearl millet, groundnut, rice, and maize. And the cumulative number of breeding lines and accessions available from CBI, the Crop Breeding Institute, and the National Gene Bank from 2019 to 2023 is also quite significant, and we have a strong collaboration in the relationship with the National Gene Bank. And a total of 40 accessions also were accessed by smallholder farmers. And we think that this cooperation really is quite important. And also a total of 170 stable lines also were accessed by smallholder farmers in these districts between these cropping seasons. experience regarding smallholder farmers' access to national and international gene bank materials. I think CTDT organizes joint germplasm collection missions with the National Gene Bank across the country every 2 years, especially to areas where there are threats of loss of genetic resources. And materials are collected and also deposited in community seed banks, and duplicate samples are stored in the National Gene Bank. The second year, I think, as I've said, we also take some of these materials to the SADC Regional Gene Bank based in Lusaka, Zambia. However, if we look at some of the challenges, there's no feedback mechanism from some of these breeding institutions to smallholder farmers. Outcome of the on-farm evaluation or whatever they prefer to be released lines which they would want to have. So smallholder farmers end up giving local names to breeding lines which they prioritized for release because of lack of feedback. And these materials might end up being recorded as farmer varieties. These are some of the challenges we're experiencing. And most gene banks are located far away from the reach of smallholder farmers, as they are located in the capitals of most countries. And the majority of the smallholder farmers do not know about the existence of these gene banks. There's little or no awareness raising efforts of the existence of these facilities by staff in the gene banks and the ministries of agriculture. So germplasm collection missions by gene bankers give little or no information to smallholder farmers about the purpose of these collections. And smallholder farmers are not informed that they can request to get back small quantities of the collected materials from the gene banks to their fields in case they lose them through floods, droughts, etc. So there's need to have a mechanism which facilitates farmers' access to some of the lost materials for restoration purposes. There's limited exposure of gene bank training to agriculture students in universities or in agriculture colleges, for that matter. So thank you so much, and these are some of the issues I thought I could share with you this morning, and we can actually discuss some of these points. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew, for this presentation. Now I would like to open the floor for any questions that might have come up following your presentation. So I would like to invite all of the webinar attendees to reflect on Andrew's presentation, and if there is any question that you might have, I would like to invite everyone to either raise their hand through the Zoom system or to pose, to put your question in the chat function. So if there's any question for clarification or any question for discussion, reflecting on what Andrew has shared with us, please raise your hand. Meanwhile, I did see a comment in the chat coming in from Ronnie Vernooy. Yeah, okay, first I see someone has raised their hands. Where do we go? Yes, there is a question from Kuldeep Singh, who's asking, is there any difficulties that you're facing accessing germplasm from ICRISAT's gene bank in Zimbabwe? Andrew, that is a question directed to you. Do you want to address that one?
Yes, I think with respect to ICRISAT, we have very good working relationships, and I think we access all the materials we want. So with ICRISAT or CIMIT, we don't have any challenges to date. So we have a very cordial and collaborative working framework.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Okay, so I see there's one more comment that was placed in the chat. It's Sarah Paul Dahl is asking, what kind of feedback mechanism do you think should exist between farmers and breeders?
Yeah, I think there is really need to have a framework where some of the materials which maybe farmers would be working on or accessing from these institutions, so that then the breeders would understand or appreciate the materials which farmers would like to have in terms of the utilization, and also how adaptive some of these materials they are working on in their local communities, so that then the research with breeders is kind of farmer-led. That is what is important, so that then the adoption rate of those technologies would be much faster, because then farmers would be defining the kind of characteristics which they want, or the traits which they want these materials to have within their communities. So I think we need to have this farmer-led and farmer-breeder interaction much more intense, so that the adoption of technologies becomes even much easier. Because then if there is no cooperation and collaboration, technologies adoption is very low of whatever materials which comes from the agriculture research institutions.
Great, thanks, Andrew. There's time for 2 more questions. There's one question coming in from Jane Lakeut asking, have you tried to ask farmers why they give local names to the seeds instead of the breeder's given name?
Yeah, because some of these materials are not released material, and because then they are there, and the breeders might not give them names, but maybe numbers. So farmers end up giving them their local names based on the performance of these materials. So this is why it is also important to have this kind of cooperation and collaboration between farmers and breeders. So if they don't explain, farmers then would have to take the opportunity to give them their own name, local names.
There's another question from Christelle Rabil asking, do you report back to the Genebank feedback about the accessions received? So do you report feedback to the Genebank about the accessions that you received?
Yes, definitely, because this is a joint initiative between the National Genebank and also the farmers. So we try and create a tripartite arrangement where farmers, Genebank, and ourselves are working together to collect the materials, to give feedback in the performance of the materials which we access from the National Genebank, and then farmers can select from that gene pool what they want and why they are also not preferring some of those materials. So the Genebank would also know the traits which farmers actually prefer from those materials.
Great. Then there's a question from Vetri Ventan Mani, who's asking, what are all the challenges while introducing land races to the farming communities, considering the land races were not mostly evaluated or tested for yield, stress tolerance compared to the breeding lines or improved varieties? I'm not sure if the question is clear.
Yeah, I don't know if I hear correctly. The question is why the farmers are not adopting some of the materials?
Yeah, I'm asking, I've unmuted Vetri Ventan. So Vetri Ventan, if you want to clarify or elaborate your question, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Andrew. Good morning.
Yes.
This is Vetri from Genebank, Genebank. Actually, while we provide access to germplasm land races to the farming communities, and some of the land races are the germplasm that may not be adapted or may not be suitable or may not be tested for the stress tolerance or yield. So what are challenges we will be facing if we introduce such material?
Well, because I think sometimes we get this maybe 30 different, 40 different accessions from ICRISAT, and we do on-farm characterization and maybe variety testing. And some of the materials will then be selected by farmers, but some may not be selected by farmers. And they will be also testing some of these material with the local check materials, which is their own land races. And some of the material or some of the land races may perform better than the introduced materials. So farmers would then tend to maintain their materials and also enrich their materials with some materials coming from ecrisites. So most of it is determined by how these materials perform against the local material. So anything which does not perform better than the local material doesn't stand a better chance to be adopted by farmers, naturally.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So there's two more questions, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. There's a question in French, and there's a few abbreviations used that I'm not acquainted with. But the question is, are there IG or PDO species in this bank? And if so, do you manage? How do you manage them? I think IG or PDO means open pollinated varieties.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yes.
In most cases, some of these sorghums are open pollinated materials. Very few hybrids have been developed in this region. So yeah, most of the materials are open pollinated. Very few hybrids are on the market currently or with farmers. So by and large, these improved but open pollinated materials have a very good yield sometimes, and also palatability and so forth. So yeah, I think farmers would prefer some of these open pollinated because of cost issues.
Sorry, and then the question also is there IG means geographical indication?
Geographic. Well, yeah, we don't have many materials which have geographically or geographically indicated materials, in Zimbabwe, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, thanks. We're going to the last question, that is by Teshome, who wants to know, why did you choose to focus on accessing stable lines rather than multiplying the seeds of new varieties that Naro has no capacity to multiply and distribute?
We do both, because some of the material coming from the Naro also is accessed by farmers, and we do variety testing for maybe 3 seasons and getting data. And if it does very well, that material coming from the Naro, we also do the kind of multiplication and distribution of those materials. But also some of the local materials which perform quite well under the local conditions, we do support them as well. So we do both.
Yeah, great. Okay, last question from Jane Laycott. Do you have farmers institutions to improve on these collaborations and two-way communication?
Yes, we do have quite a number of farmer field schools which really undertake this kind of work, which we also jointly have with Oxfam. But we also have a farmer seed enterprise where the smallholder farmers are now applying some of this seed and also selling them on the open market after going through the whole certification process. So yeah, there is really efforts to do that and get some of this material from the National Agricultural Research Institution to get on the market through these kind of initiatives.
A last clarification on the French question from Hafida Zedour Mohamed Brahim about the types of seeds that the banks that you get from the banks. The question also is about protected varieties. Are they kept in the bank, and how do you manage them?
No, most of the released varieties, which are formal varieties, they don't go into the community seed banks. We don't keep them in community seed banks. These are owned by private seed houses, and we don't really look after them as such.
Great. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you so much to all the attendees for raising such interesting questions. We will proceed swiftly with our next speaker. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your contribution, for your presentation. I would like to introduce as the next speaker, Dr. John Mulumba, who's the curator of the Entebbe Botanic Gardens and Senior Principal Research Officer at the National Agricultural Research Organization of Uganda. He will be speaking about participatory evaluation of the genetic resources from the national gene banks of Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. John, I'm inviting you to take the floor. I hope you are able also to share your screen in order to share the presentation that you're gonna give. Thank you so much, John. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Note, and greetings to everybody. Dear participants, nice to see a whole 70 people on board. I'm sharing with you the work that we have done with several partners, including Biodiversity International, the Kenya Gene Bank, Tanzania Gene Bank, and Uganda Gene Bank, and the many other partners that have been part of this work. And just to give you a bit of the background where we came from, we all know that smallholder farmers in our part of the world have many challenges to do with the seed systems, the current seed systems, which do not really serve their purpose to the fullest. And we also know that there is a lot of limited diversity of quality seed that they would love to have, and many other factors that I will not go into, but I know colleagues here are aware of. So you probably all know that in East Africa, levels of undernourishment remain high, and we all believe that climate change is likely to increase this further. So increasing farmers' access to a much wider range of agricultural biodiversity, we believe should arm the small-scale farmers to better manage climate risks and the biotic stresses. So to help the resource-poor farmers to better cope with this, we ran a project which was funded by the International Treaty Benefit Sharing Fund, which looked at increasing the availability and diversity of genetic material of 3 important crops, and these were sorghum, finger millet, and beans, and also to look at how to strengthen marketing channels in order to disseminate most promising varieties, and to pilot open source seed systems to enhance the use of high quality seeds among the project sites where we are working. This slide simply gives you the broader picture of our objectives, and the objectives at a higher scale. We are facilitating climate change adaptation and putting the multilateral system into use as far as climate change challenges are concerned. Then strengthening participatory evaluation and selecting of promising lines for moving into the breeding processes with the breeding programs of the partner countries, and putting material in open access so that can easily be accessed. This shows you, summarizes the whole procedure from analyzing the gaps that existed within the communities where we are working, selection of tools and software that we used to be able to see what we need to do, then using climate change analysis and the germplasm identification. Then we moved into acquisition of germplasm from different gene banks, went into field testing and crowdsourcing with the farmers. That led to selecting of material and enhancing the multiplication and distribution of those that were proving good to the farmers. These maps show you where we worked. We worked in the 3 countries as earlier mentioned, And those were the sites. In Uganda, we had one site, and in Kenya, one site, while in Tanzania, we had 2 sites. And this particular slide shows you the material that we are able, using the tools that are available for GIS modeling and the environmental factors assessment. We are able to identify materials, locations in the different countries where the climate was very similar to the sites where we are working. So this shows you, the first one on the left shows you the Kenya one for beans, and then the middle one is Tanzania, again for beans, and for Uganda. So we are able to realize that many locations actually shared similar temperatures and precipitations, and we targeted materials that had been collected from these particular locations. Methodologically, we looked at climate change analysis, as I've already mentioned. We looked at meteorological data, but we also engaged farmers in farmer group discussions, and also shared their local knowledge, and then did predictions. So combining the GIS information and climate modeling helped us to match those accessions with the climates, and identifying specific climate challenges for current and the future. So this helped us to get to the national gene banks and access materials, but also in the international gene bank accessions, materials that had been collected in those sites that we had been able to identify through the modeling exercises. So then we also had the very participatory exercises with the farmers, understanding their climate change perceptions, understanding what loss of diversity to them means due to climate change, understanding their preferences, and so on. So this led us to now participatory evaluation and selection from the materials that we had acquired from the Matato system and the national gene banks, focusing on key traits that had emerged out of our engagement with the communities and farmers, and also our own analysis. So up to 300 farmers, we had up to 300 farmers per location. We looked at specific traits, and we had more than 400 accessions of millets, sorghum, and beans that we are looking at. This particular slide shows you how things were happening. On your left, you see selection of elite materials that can go into the breeding programs by the scientists there. In the middle is the crowdsourcing, where the farmers would go away with 2, 3 or so different materials, grow them on their farms, and then record on the performance of these materials, and then bring feedback back to the entire group. And on your right is participatory variety selection. Farmers themselves are recording what they are seeing in the field. Then, of course, after all that was done and material identified, and lines that farmers felt were good for them were identified, there was a lot of dissemination and also conservation activities, dissemination of information, and also informing people about the diversity and its good attributes. But also we were able to establish community seed banks in these locations where these materials are held. This one shows farmers that are enjoying a seed fair, both in Uganda and in Tanzania, passing on knowledge to fellow farmers, but also to other stakeholders on the value of these materials. So what really happened thereafter? out of all those materials that were accessed and brought down to the communities, and communities worked with them together with the scientists, up to 10 finger millet varieties and 10 sorghum varieties from different countries were picked by Kenya, and the Nyando farmers, that is at our site, are working with a private entity called Dash Crop, which realized that these varieties were actually of very good quality for flour, and these farmers are producing these materials and feeding this little entity for flour production. So in Nyanda alone, we are looking at now about 180 varieties of sorghum and 90 of millet and 40 of beans are being held there, in addition to other materials that farmers themselves have brought into their community seed bank. In Tanzania, we are looking at 10 sorghum varieties, many of which came from Uganda, and the 200 farmers are growing these sorghum varieties, at least by that time. And in Uganda, we saw 7 bean materials and the 7 finger millet ones. And over 400 farmers are producing these materials. And the Hoima Community Seed Bank is holding these materials and serves over 800 farmers in that area. So some of the benefits in broad sense, we saw a lot of knowledge transfer through training programs on quality seed production, seed fairs, and so on, and a lot of community strengthening of their abilities in undertaking interactions and group dynamics, among many other very interesting things that emerged. But also in the science side, we saw that the participatory approach really strengthened the farmers' contribution to knowledge development, and also to contributing to the development of new materials that farmers would love to have in the future. And a lot of this information actually now is shared by the breeders in the different countries together with the materials, so they can also work with these materials to produce even better varieties. But also in terms of food security, we saw that more food was made available in these communities. For example, here I'm giving an example of in Tanzania, the varieties were better resistant to low moisture content in the soil, a characteristic of the semi-arid conditions of those sites where we are working. And farmers reported yield increases from an average of 6,000 kilograms per hectare to 7,500 kilograms per hectare. So yes, in a nutshell, that's what I can cover in the 10 minutes. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, John Malumba, for your presentation. Much appreciated. I would like to invite all the attendees to this webinar to reflect on John's presentation and to raise any questions in case there's any. We would like to invite you to either raise your hand through the Zoom system or to write up your question or message directly in the Q&A box. There is one question already coming in from Mohamed Ali Dridri, who is asking how to overcome administrative obstacles. John, is that something that you can address?
How to overcome administrative obstacles at what level?
At national seed legislation level, potentially. Let me see if I can. Commercialization is Mohammed's clarification. So on the level of commercialization.
Okay. Yes, commercialization was indeed quite a challenge, because we got to a level when countries had received materials from other countries, and these materials, first of all, if you start from the international level, the international treaty level, these are materials still in the form received largely. So they are not registered varieties at the local level or at regional level. So that became a bit of a challenge for the bigger commercialization. For small scale little businesses in the communities, that wasn't a challenge. But if you wanted to move these materials to a higher level of commercialization, that proved a challenge. So we thought of options of handling this. And one option that we came up with was that we probably need to look at, can these materials be recognized and registered as varieties in the countries where they originate from, so that now they are passed on as materials that are recognized varieties. And in Uganda, we started that process, bearing in mind that many of these actually were largely farmer materials. We said, can we also start a process of influencing the policy, the regulatory system, to have a regulatory system for farmer variety registration? We've worked on that in Uganda to a great extent, and actually good enough the law in Uganda had space for the minister to put a new schedule into the regulatory framework. So we took advantage of that and we developed the instruments. These instruments are with the Ministry of Agriculture now. We have waited for quite a while for them to pronounce themselves on this, but we thought that that was one way of moving these materials forward. Because the question is, if there are materials in the communities that are worthwhile, why shouldn't we have them commercialized? And why should a limitation of the fact that it's not a variety that has been bred through the formal system be really the constraint to having these materials that farmers have liked and preferred getting out there? So yes, there are challenges around there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I am afraid we're running a little bit behind our schedule, so I'm allowing only for one more question, and then we'll move on to our last speaker of today. I would like to invite Dr. John also to have a look at the webinar chat Q&A, because there's a couple of more questions addressed to you. And the last question I'm going to ask to John is from Hafida Zedur Mohamed Bramin, who is asking, very interesting experience. I would like to know how you could gather all those farmers, as we know that farmers are very unlikely to share, or at least to let their farms and go for expositions and trainings. Is that something you can address?
Well, yes, we've tapped into our experience over a long time on how to engage farmers and farming communities. For the last about 20 years, we've worked very much with the communities, and we have mastered quite a bit of the art of engaging farmer communities and farmers to bring them on board so that you can talk the same language. One thing that is clear to us is that if you want farmers to listen to you, you must spend a bit of time listening to them. You must listen to them and get to the same level of understanding, and they must feel that you are part of them for you to be able to engage them and move with them forward.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for addressing all these questions. And again, please have a look at the chat to see if there's any other questions that you might want to address. Meanwhile, we are going to move on to our last speaker of today, and I would like to invite Zakaria Kehel from the genetic resources. He's a genetic resources scientist and senior biometrician at ICARDA. And I would like to invite you, Zakaria, to introduce Genesis and a new subsetting tool for finding useful materials from gene banks. I've been informed that you're going to share your own screen. So please, Zakaria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nut. So you see my screen and you hear me, I assume.
Yes, we're seeing it.
I will be talking today, of course, and sharing our knowledge on how we work with collaborators and users in the Genebank. And to do that work, one of the most important, challenge, not anymore really with the availability of tool and information, is really how to identify promising accessions subset in general. And that's what the question as Genebank manager you get. I need this kind of accessions, and if you want to identify the best one for your clients or collaborators, you need, of course, access to information to be able. It doesn't, maybe. Yeah, okay. So you need to have access to information. And one of the information portal really is that we are using to share passport information, traits, our available subsets. We'll see what are the subsets really and how we define them, is Genesis. And Genesis is really a platform where users can find information about plant genetic resources for food and agriculture that are conserved worldwide. And you have information from several gene banks, more than 4 million accessions, and we have also reported subsets. Again, we will see what are the subsets, and also some information attached to the accessions, which are characterization. Those kind of information that we are generating in Genebank to understand the collection, but also the evaluation. I saw a question from somebody that Genebank material compared to breeding material is not necessarily evaluated for yield and diseases. Of course, not for the whole collection, but depending on the project and the interest and the collaboration we have with several users, we go sometime and we evaluate for biotic and abiotic diseases, for nutritional quality, and for some traits that are related to climate change. So Genesis is really a platform where people can get access to passport information, subsets, and core collections. Core collections is a category of subsets where we try to maximize the diversity we have in the collection in smaller sets. Of course, data sets and also crop descriptors. So for the passport information, I want just people to have a look at Genesis, and this is a good platform to as a start to look for what we need from gene banks. So you have very good dashboard to see from where the collection, where are they, and also you have filtering areas, so people can filter with several categories, including, for example, crop name. So we have the list of all the crops available under Genesis. You can filter, of course, with biological status. Some people want traditional varieties, landraces, cultivars, or they want wild relatives in case of breeding, that they want to bring wild gene, etc. And then you apply filter and you get another dashboard. And you have, of course, a list of your applied filters. You have access to the list of accessions. You can look at the really details of each accessions if you want, and you can add it to your list, what we call shopping list, so you can access it from Genebanks. A map, of course, to see the distribution of what has been filtered. And lately we are looking also and filtering based on some characterization, as I said, and evaluation data. This is an example, for example, for barley, where a user, he wants a very specific own color for barley, and he wants to use days to maturity as a proxy for earliness. That user wants just yellow and brown owns. That's what they're using for some, as a nutritional quality output or for their end use product, and they want, for example, early material to escape drought or to escape some disease. You get the list, and of course the same. You can access this list or add it to your shopping list, and of course get access to the Genebank holding it, so it can be distributed. So what is an accession subset? We have the entire collection, and we cannot. When you look at the size of the collections, and you saw at the beginning, only in Genesis, we have more than 4 million accessions. So if you take a crop with tens of thousands of accessions and you don't want to distribute it because you don't have the resources. And of course, the user doesn't want to deal with 10,000 accessions. So we want a small set, very useful for the user, as small as possible. And that we use, as we saw in Genesis, we use passport information, characterization, evaluation data in the field for disease and yield. So we can identify those accessions needed by the users. Sometimes it can be very simple, like I want this species of lentil, and then we just access it and then we can distribute it. Well, if we look at the distribution of CGIAR initiative or Genebank under the CGIAR initiative, and you look at the numbers that we are distributing, those numbers, very easy to read, very difficult to reach, because in the right side, those kind of accession we get. This kind of when somebody is sending a request, this is the question we put in our mind. People are asking for very, very specific thing. I want diverse wheat for heat tolerance or salinity. I want accession for high elevation, high tolerance to heat and drought. All this biotic and abiotic stresses. And of course, since again, we don't have evaluation for everything we hold in Genebank, because it's just impossible looking at the size again of the collections for most of Genebank, especially the international Genebank. So we use some proxies, and we saw in the presentations before they were using World Claim data, which is really a proxy for diversity. Those are long-term climatic or ecological information that will give the user or the scientists a proxy for the diversity. So we have, in this context, developed a tool under the Genebank initiative and in collaboration with the Crop Trust for Genesis. So for all the categories of the questions that you cannot just filter based on the available data, because mainly you don't have access to this data. So we have developed a tool that will allow a customized subset from multiple crops and from multiple Genebank. And this is what they are doing here. Again, I'm giving just a general overview due to the lack of time, but of course we are happy at the Genebank initiative to give a more formal training on the tool and get feedback from the users. So we use some soil and agroclimatic characteristic to develop indicators for drought, flooding, heat, etc. And then based on what we have as information in Genesis, we develop kind of distribution, let's say, for drought stress across the whole collection of wheat or barley or banana. And then we want to select the one that we want. If I have a distribution of precipitation from 100 millimeters a year to 2,000 millimeters a year, and I'm focusing on dry seasons, I will go and try to select accessions coming from dry environments. And this is how it works. So the tool under Genesis will go immediately and gather all the public information in terms of environment and soil. It will give a characterization of the collection. It will cluster them and group them, and then the user can look at each group and see what is the best group for his needs. Like here, for example, I may assume that looking at the total precipitation and total consecutive dry days, that means the number of days that they are consecutive without even 1 millimeter of rain, I will be more interested on set number 2, because that's the set I want for my dry environment, because it's coming from areas where the environment has very little precipitation and also a lot of days without rain. So the tool will give you several functionality to look at your groups and select the group you want. It will give also some text to help users that they are not at the top of the methodology to interpret what they are looking at in those graphs. And of course, since sometimes we end up having a big subset, that means more than 200, 300, the tool will help you select a smaller subset, and then the user can select 5 or 10 in using some statistical models. And as we saw in Genesis, the user can just add this to the shopping list, and Genesis will automatically distribute this list of material of, if we see the holding institution of the Genebank that they are holding this institution, if of course the Genebank accepted in the contract with Genesis to receive a request through Genesis. So yeah, this is the list, and of course we are happy here to of course introduce the tool in more details, but also work with the users, farmers or farmer communities or NGOs to even identify germplasm that maybe even with or without the tool, that it's really helpful for the user. And our germplasm, of course, here I'm saying it's very healthy and ready to be distributed once we know exactly the objective of the study or the objective of the user. Thank you.
Zakaria, thank you so much for your elaborate presentation on this subsetting tool and the Genesis system. Much appreciated. Mindful of time, we only have approximately 10 minutes left, unfortunately. So I would like to invite the audience to reflect on the presentation of Zakaria and to raise your hand through the Zoom system, or to write up any questions in the question and answer or chat function in this system. After a short round of questions and answers, if there's any, we will like to ask you a couple of more questions. The webinar organizers, we prepared a few more polling questions. But first, I would like to ask the audience, the webinar participants, and the attendees, if there's any question that you would like to raise with Zakaria based on the presentation given. Let me see. So far, there is no question coming in. There is a message that was posted a few minutes ago by Belbata Torheim, who is putting a link to a community seed bank experience in Nepal. So please take note of that as well for inspiration. So far, no other questions have come in yet. So I give a last chance for people to raise their hand, their voice. While I'm checking all the channels where questions could potentially come in. Well, Zakaria, it seems that your presentation has been crystal clear because few questions have come in so far. So let me again thank you so much on behalf of all the webinar organizers for well, presenting the Genesis and the subsetting tool. As mentioned, I would like to, is there someone speaking? There is a one last question coming in indeed from Teshom. It's a general one. Should we say that NGOs access germplasm or facilitates farmers' access to germplasm? Zark, is that something you could address? I'm allowing Teshom to talk. So Teshom, if you want to, you could elaborate your question by speaking.
Thank you. I'm just wondering because, you know, improving access for NGOs and farmers is the title of this webinar. And thinking practically, personally, I don't know NGOs accessing for themselves, but supporting farmers most of the time through community seed bank and cooperatives and so on. So do NGOs access germplasm actually? Do they request and get a physical seed? I'm just asking colleagues.
Thanks a lot, Teshome, for this question. I'd like to invite any of the webinar presenters to address Teshome's question.
Yes, this is Andrew. I think we have done that. Yeah, we do actually access quite some material. We have even moving on to have an MOU with ICRISAT to facilitate this access to these materials. So yeah, your question is yes, this is very possible. Because if you are working with farmers through some of these community seed banking initiatives, it's very possible that some NGOs can access some of these germplasm and have some understanding with the National Agriculture Research Institutions, the CGIAR, the National Gene Banks, to access these material and provide them for research with farmers. That is very possible. And we have over 20 years experience doing this.
Thank you so much, Andrew, for addressing that question. Thanks to Teshome for posing a question. I would like to, on behalf of the organizing institutions, I would like to thank again the speakers of today, Zakaria Kehel, Andrew Mishida, and John Malumba. Thank you so much for your time today, and thank you to all the webinar participants for taking 1.5 hours off to be with us here today. We hope to be sharing results with you over email soon. With these last words, I'm going to close the results of the poll, and I'm also going to stop sharing my screen. And I would like to wish you all a very pleasant rest of your day, wherever you are. Good night, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to you all. Bye-bye.